So you are very welcome to this session on creating trauma-informed Yoga Nidra. My name is Julia Davis, and I'm here with Tessa Venuti Sanderson. And we love to settle our own nervous systems before we start a session. And it would be lovely if you'd like to settle yours. So I'm going to invite Tessa to do a little settling practice before you run through what this hour is going to look like.
Because we know it's often that last minute rush to find the link and scrabble to get here. So if you are sitting somewhere where you can just comfortably lean back into the seat, you might even want to close your eyes or take your eyes away from the screen. Maybe you've got a nice view out of a window, and just take a moment to become present and take a pause. So noticing that contact, if you are leaning against something between your back and the seat, or whatever your bottom is on, something softer or firmer, and down through the legs to the feet. Maybe your feet are on the floor, maybe they're tucked up underneath you, all the way down to the toes and tips of the toes. So coming into the body and noticing the breath. How is the breath? Not necessarily to change anything about it, but just to notice wherever it's easiest. Maybe it's through the nostrils, maybe it's in the chest or down into the belly. But just taking a few breaths to fully arrive, because you are very welcome here and we're very happy to see you. And also just having a moment to connect with your intention of why you put aside this time this morning to join us. So we hope to answer your questions as we go through. And then once that intention has a chance to be felt in the heart, I invite you, when you're ready, to, if you've had your eyes closed, to open them again and look around the room to orient yourself, just noticing 2 or 3 things that you can see. And then maybe leaning into the screen, just having a look at who's here this morning. And I'll hand back to Julia to tell us what we're going to be running through.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us and to watch on Catch Up if you're watching on Catch Up. What we're going to be doing today is Tessa and I both run a training, which is Yoga Nidra and circle holding. So we'll tell you a little bit about that training and what that's all about. And we are going to give you 3 really clear tips that you can use to make your Yoga Nidra more trauma-informed. So that the 3 tips that we're going to be looking at is your role as a Yoga Nidra facilitator, comfort and posture, and the use of Sankalpa. So those are the 3 tips that we're going to be giving you today. And throughout that, we're also going to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself in the chat, to ask any questions in the chat as we go along. For those of you who are watching the recording, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. You'll see a little box beneath where we're sharing this, or there'll be a place where you can ask your questions. And then for those of you who are with us live in person, what we'll do is at the end of the session, we will be turning off the recording so that if you've got any questions that you want to ask that aren't going to be recorded for everyone else, then you can ask them then. What I would say about that is that however you think your question might land, it is often really, really useful for everyone there. You've probably got a question in your head that you think, oh, I'm really not sure about this question. I don't know whether it's relevant or useful. It's very likely that there's at least one other person who has got that same question. And so if you're brave enough to pop it in the chat or ask while this session is going along, then everyone will benefit from the answer. Okay, so we're going to kick off by telling you a little bit more about the Yoga Nidra and circle holding training. One of the reasons why it's Yoga Nidra and circle holding is because we believe that circle holding is a beautiful way in which to help Yoga Nidra become trauma informed. The training begins on the 9th of September. It runs through until the 14th of October, and it's on Mondays, 12:30 to 2:30, and that's BST, where both Tessa and I are in the UK. So that's UK timing. Do look at wherever you live in the world to adjust accordingly. The reason why we love to run it live, and it's great if you could come live, is because it is a training where you practice as you go along. So each week we introduce a different aspect of Yoga Nidra and you practice it. And we look at how each thing that you do could be trauma informed. And also we encourage you to practice. So that might be practicing on your brother, your sister, whoever lives in a home with you, your clients, if you've got students, or the other people who are doing the training as well. So it's really interactive and practical. And when you practice and then you receive feedback, you can actually hear from people what their physical experience of a practice is. And that is one of the best ways to be trauma informed, is to actually receive feedback from the people that you're gifting the practice to, just as if you were sharing a meditation practice and you had a feedback from that.
Yeah, I was just going to add, so because in past trainings we've had people who aren't yoga teachers, who are maybe sound therapists or coaches, and so they might not have a kind of group class that they can readily practice on. So it might be sort of one-to-one clients or something like that. But it's a very adaptable technique that can be used in different situations.
Yeah. So that's the training. It's 2 hours live. In between the sessions, you have the opportunity to practice, to interact with the other people. People have come on this training with us and really made friends that they've stayed in contact with, that have supported them. It's kind of, we create the group, and then from the group, friendships form, support networks form. And that's another way to be trauma informed, is to make sure that you've got the support network in place for you as you share this practice. And that's something that really makes a lot of sense, we think. So that's a little bit about the training. You can find it at circleholding.org or yogateachersforum.org. Either of those websites have got details of that, and feel free to ask us any questions about that at the end of this session. So then we're going to be looking at your role as a Yoga Nidra facilitator, your comfort and posture, and the use of Sankalpa. But before we do that, it will be really helpful for us to have an idea of who you are if you've come live. So we would love for you to share in the chat, because we've got quite a lot of people who are here today, so we haven't got the time and space to create a circle in the way that we might if we're running the training. So if you could just pop in the chat your name, maybe where you're from in the world, and what brought you here. So what is your interest in trauma-informed Yoga Nidra? Are you a Yoga Nidra practitioner yourself? Are you not sure about what Yoga Nidra is, but you share deep relaxation practices? What brought you here? And maybe you're somebody who specializes in trauma and not that relaxation practice. It's lovely for us to know who you are and where your interests lie, so that we can answer questions accordingly. If, as you say where you are and what brought you here, you have a question, then that's something that we'll address after we've gone through the 3 tips with you.
I'll just, while people are typing, I'll just respond to Julia's question, because she says she has to leave by 10, but I would encourage you to come back and look at the rest of the recording. Yeah, definitely. Same with mental trauma. I do a lot of work around trauma for birth trauma. So very often it's not actually that there's been a birth injury, it's that something has happened in the course of the birth that has been mentally traumatic. So yes, very much what we're going to talk about helps keep those people comfortable and safe as well.
Yeah. And we've got somebody who's a primary school teacher who's here, and Tessa does an awful lot of work with kids. Yoga Nidra can be a beautiful practice to share with children, and it's, there are lots of tricks and tips that you can use to make them fun and enjoyable and trauma informed as well. And that's something that's really true of the training that we run, that we have had people who have run it for very specific demographics. And what is great about creating your own Yoga Nidra that you've written or shared yourself is that you can adapt it to the audience that you have. You haven't got a script in front of you that you have to stick to. You've created something that really suits your audience, and that really helps make it suitable for the audience that you're creating it for.
It's lovely to see such a range of different
I'm seeing, yeah,
groups.
we've got lots of things scrolling down. So somebody who creates, who teaches mainly Yin Yoga. Yoga Nidra works beautifully with Yin Yoga because it's such a gentle practice that slipping in a Yoga Nidra where people have the opportunity to rest for a little time is really lovely. Yeah, so there's some people who've got trauma-informed training, disabilities, dementia, health issues. It is really lovely. Not only especially if you're working with those demographics, often it's not only the people who've got the condition that we support, but we often need to support the carers of those people, and they're often present. For example, with dementia, you often have the person with dementia and their carer. And if that's the case, it's really lovely to share a practice that is also suitable for the carer, because often the carers need Yoga Nidra too. It's a lovely thing to offer someone who's supporting somebody else. Yeah, we definitely look at language. Language is a big thing. Okay, so got a lovely variety of people. Do continue to say who you are, or you can pop it down later if you want to concentrate on what we're saying. So we're going to start by looking at your role as a Yoga Nidra sharer. And over to you, Tessa, for that.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the reasons that we bring in circle holding is that my feeling is that when you're facilitating the Nidra, you're creating a container. And that's the same as when you have a talking circle, you're creating a container for somebody to share their experience. So as the facilitator, we can help create that container by what we're sort of physically doing in the room. So we're definitely keeping our eyes open when we're delivering it, rather than joining in with people lying down and closing our eyes. We want to be able to watch what is happening, and if somebody starts to get agitated or they're fidgeting a lot, we're sort of taking in that kind of information. So we definitely need our eyes open. And if we need to get up to switch off lights or to open a window or close a window, we're narrating what we're doing, so that if somebody has closed their eyes, they don't suddenly get a surprise when they hear your voice somewhere different. So it's basic details like that. When I'm working one-to-one with clients, I might also say to them, where would you like to be in the room? You choose where you feel comfortable. And it might be that they choose somewhere where, when we're initially talking, they can see the door. So they could see if somebody opens the door and who's coming, rather than have their back to the door. You can also do that in a group situation. I mean, obviously, there's less scope for choosing exactly, but I might say to somebody who I know has a history of trauma, maybe get here a little bit early so that you can choose where you want to be in the room. And, generally we try not to walk around the room too much. So you're sitting, you're alert, you're watching what is happening. If you like, you're sort of the eyes and ears of the room, because you never know quite what might happen. I've had sort of tree surgeons starting up outside the room ready to cut a tree, and then you kind of have to see how you're going to respond to that kind of situation. So you're creating this physical container, and then of course through the way that you're settling people, you're helping to prepare their nervous system for the practice itself. And one thing I particularly wanted to pick out was the use of images, because in some traditional forms of Yoga Nidra, there's a lot of, after the body rotations and opposites, there's a place where often go into different kinds of images, and you're switching between quite sort of archetypal images, and it's just one to the other. And this, is done for a reason, that it can help you go into a liminal space. But the only danger with strong images is that they can be triggering for people. And particularly if we have a group of people in front of us, we don't know which image might be triggering. So I think I'm right in speaking on behalf of Julie as well. I think both of us like to try and simplify things. So you might choose an image. It might, say, I can think of one last week where I was using the image of an oak tree. But I was choosing one image and working with that. And then the important thing is we're giving people choices. So we've created this container to help people feel physically safe in the room, to settle their nervous systems. But then within that container, we're giving a little bit of choice. If I give you a different example as well, so with the body rotation, where you're going around different parts of the body, sometimes I might offer an idea of, perhaps you'd like to imagine, or perhaps you can feel through the window, sunshine warming that part of the body. But I'll always give a choice. But if you don't like that idea, because maybe say I'm doing a pregnancy yoga class and they're tending to overheat anyway with the baby on board, that might not be appropriate. I might say, or you can simply take your awareness to that body, that part of the body. So for me, a really big role, or a part of the trauma-informed way of doing Yoga Nidra is choice. You're bringing in options so that if somebody doesn't connect with that image or that idea in the body rotation, like the example I just gave, they've got another way that they can deal with that. I think it's a shame to completely get rid of images because they can be so powerful. And with the circle holding, you might, in a group situation, or if it's one-to-one, you could say, what I was thinking today was using the image of an oak tree. Does anybody particularly have an issue that they know of with oak trees? So you can kind of preempt it in that way. And I think that, as I say, images can be very powerful. So we don't want to just get rid of them because they might be triggering, but there's ways that we can help people to lessen the triggering. And give them options. Julia, do you want to come in and add?
Yeah, because I think it's who you are that can really help with people's nervous system. So if they know you, if they've come to a class with you, if you've spoken to them before, the more familiar that they are with you and the way that you teach and the way that you are, the more comfortable they will be with you sharing a Yoga Nidra practice. And you don't need to necessarily tell people the nuts and bolts of Yoga Nidra when they first practice it with you. What you can do is you can give them an idea. You're going to have the opportunity to lie down. You can lie down in whatever way, and then you've got all the things that they could lie down with. And it's going to be a relaxation practice where we go to the body parts, and my intention is for you to feel really lovely or really nice and relaxed. It's really useful for people to know what your intention is for their practice. So if you let them know it's your intention for them to have a lovely time, that even if we can't guarantee that every single person practicing Yoga Nidra is not going to have some kind of adverse reaction, that's something that we actually look at in Yoga Nidra training. What do we do if and when someone has an adverse reaction? We can do all the things that we want to do to help prevent that, but it can still happen. If they know that your intention for running the practice is to give them a nice time, is for them to have a pleasant experience, then even if they do have an adverse reaction, it can help them feel better to know what your intention was for them, for you to have a really lovely, relaxing time. And that intention shared can also really help them feel, like if they've been told that the intention is for them to feel comfortable, they're already in a place where that could start happening for them. Because you said, oh, and they're kind of like, oh, my shoulders are dropping. This is going to be a nice thing. And they're ready for a nice thing.
I think that's such an important point, Julia, because I mean, most of the time when I'm delivering Yoga Nidra, and I use it in most of my yoga classes, it is just to let somebody have a bit of a relax, to switch off. That's quite different from when I might use it in a yoga for birth trauma session where something bigger is happening and we're trying to work with the trauma. So I think, when it's a case of you're just trying to let somebody have a lovely relax, then perhaps the images you choose or are maybe more benign images. You might go a little bit more neutral with things, and still be very effective and give them a beautiful relaxation and a chance to switch off. Whereas sometimes what I see in some of the sort of more traditional scripts is that they're quite edgy, they're quite, you know, for example, with the emotions where you're switching between quite strong emotions. Do we really need to do that for somebody if your intention is just to give them sort of 20 minutes at the end of a class to switch off? Whereas if you're doing a workshop or you're on a retreat and you're trying to work more deeply with people, then yes, you might say to them, we're going to be working with bigger emotions. Let's switch between, you know, connecting with anger and connect, you know. So I think that's a really important point, Julia, about what is your intention as the facilitator?
Yeah. So I would encourage you to have a think about yourself as a facilitator. Neurodiverse, thank you. I just noticed there was a question that came up of someone who's got to leave in good time. So can this be used with the neurodiverse community? Absolutely. Neurodiversity is huge, though. There's a very wide net when you're talking about neurodiversity, because somebody could have autism, ADD, and you know, completely different ends of the spectrum. So it's about the individuals in your group. So if you're running a group session, I think it's really helpful for you to be able to really feel like you can see the people who are there, know their names, know what that, you know, that they might have particular foibles or things that make them uncomfortable. So the more you know, the more you can support them. But also there's a degree with some people who have certain neurodiversity, knowledge really helps them. If they don't know what they're going to get, they won't relax. So if you know that you're dealing with a neurodiverse community that need knowledge, then you talk them through what will happen. And if they then do not want to do it, you give them the opportunity to sit comfortably with their eyes open or closed and be in the space with everyone else if they would like to. So ideally, if you've got a neurodiverse community, then the people who are there will honor the need to be quiet while the Yoga Nidra is taking place. They do not need to lie down, close their eyes, and not be. And what you might find is that somebody wants to be awake and alert and see exactly what's going on the first time, and maybe the second time or third time or fourth time, they might want to join in. Or they might never want to join in. And so long as they're not impacting the other group by sitting and being part of it with their eyes open, that's absolutely fine. I've got clients that love to sit with their eyes open to be part, because they always fall asleep otherwise. And they're like, once in a while they might lie down and close their eyes, but they just like to be there. And the other people are aware, you know, like today, Sarah's going to, you know, you don't make a big deal of it because you let everyone have the opportunity to do that. And then if one person chooses that, they've chosen it. What are your thoughts on that, Tessa? Have you got other comments?
I was just thinking about how it's really important that the way we use our language in Yoga Nidra. So I was just thinking about visualization, for example, and that not everybody finds it easy to visualize. So very often I might, you know, I'll use different words to try and help different people. So I might say, you know, imagine or think about, or so if somebody can't sort of picture something in their mind's eye, I'm giving them a different way to connect with what I'm saying. So it might be, you know, with body parts at the start, it's hard for somebody to kind of connect in a really embodied way, but just think of those words. So we're just trying to signal in multiple ways how somebody can work with the different key components of the Yoga Nidra. So yeah.
Someone said that they use Insight Timer for their Yoga Nidra sharing, and that's a different way of communicating with people because people can't necessarily see you or know you, and you don't know when they're listening to the Yoga Nidra, and they don't, you know, there's that disconnect. Having said that, you can use language on the Insight Timer that lets them know a little bit to make them feel more comfortable. Maybe there's a section where they find out about you, or maybe you can describe what you're going to share, how long it's going to last, that sort of thing. And if I would say that if you're doing something that people aren't going to be there for, I would be as not neutral with language, but I would really aim to use language that is softer. So, for example, certain types of Yoga Nidra encourage, when they use opposites, to use extremes, like you're feeling really agitated, you're feeling really calm. So I would make that much more gently. You can kind of feel that you're energized, and then you're feeling that you're calm or you're less energized. I would use less powerful language. So in that form of Yoga Nidra, they often say you're feeling boiling hot, you're feeling freezing cold. So you might feel warm and cool rather than boiling hot and freezing cold. Little things like that that cause people to be less likely to have adverse reactions. But you can't control that. So part of, if you share anything online that you don't know who's going to be getting it, you might want to make sure that your insurance is in place to cover that sort of thing, because once it's out in the world, you can't really control the reactions that other people have. You can do your best to create something that you believe will be as trauma-informed as possible, but it's amazing what can be triggering to people that you would never imagine would be. My daughter absolutely hates strawberries. So you could be doing a lovely Yoga Nidra because it's round about the time of Wimbledon and you're talking about strawberries and cream, and that person's going, ah, strawberries. Who would know? Okay. So the first little tip is about your role as a Yoga Nidra facilitator. If you have any other questions that particularly pertain to your role as a Yoga Nidra facilitator, then do pop them in the chat. Okay, number 2 is the comfort and posture of your participants. So with the comfort and posture of your participants, in some traditional Yoga Nidra practices, they would say you have to lie down in Shavasana. So you have to lie down with your head looking up, your arms out, your feet out, and your body kind of exposed to the world. And what Tessa and I decide to do is something different to that. Because what we like to do is give people permission to lie in whatever way would be most comfortable for them. And the way that we tend to do that is with props or without props. So, for example, I run a class where a number of my students in that class are over a certain age, and a number of them can't lie down flat on the floor because their heads tipped up and their chin would be like this if they were to. So I encourage them to have blankets under their heads. They might have a bolster that's of a certain height. Teenagers notoriously want to kind of lie on their front or lie on their side or protect their bodies in a particular way when they lie. And it's nice to model it, to show them what that might look like. And maybe if you've been sharing a yoga practice before, maybe you've done some practices where people might have been lying on their front and noticing how comfortable they are. And props are a really good thing to use. Also, halfway through a Yoga Nidra practice, somebody might become uncomfortable. And it's really helpful for you to be looking around the room at the people who are there, if at all possible. If they're online, then you can maybe ask them to tip their cameras so they can see you. If you can't see them, then you can't do that. But if you can, what you might notice is that somebody gets a dead leg or feels uncomfortable. And then you can potentially use your language to help them become more comfortable again. And if you can't, that's where circle comes in, because after they've completed the Yoga Nidra, you might have some kind of feedback from it, and someone can say, I was feeling uncomfortable, and you can say, well, yeah, I noticed that you were feeling uncomfortable. It's unsurprising that what you were really noticing is your dead leg rather than being deeply relaxed in the Yoga Nidra. Tessa, have you got comments for that?
Just thinking how in my pregnancy yoga, I've had quite a few people recently that I noticed weren't comfortable lying down, and I had opportunity to talk to them afterwards. And in one case, it was simply that it was a morning class, Saturday morning, and she didn't feel like getting sleepy. She wanted to sit up, and she'd been saying that she, can I leave before the relaxation part? And once I had a conversation, she said it's absolutely fine to stay seated. She stayed and really got a lot out of it. So sometimes it's a really practical thing. It's not that they're not enjoying a technique per se, but it might be the effect of it isn't right for the time of day. Another thing I was going to say is, I often invite people at the beginning of the Yoga Nidra to think about relaxing into stillness, but I always give them the option, if at some point you become uncomfortable, feel free to change to another position. Whereas I know, some of the Yoga Nidras I've listened to over the years, the intention is you stay still for the whole time, and it makes you sort of almost feel, or in my case, it makes me feel that I wouldn't be doing it right if I moved. But I think, for a lot of people, the discomfort starts to just outweigh anything else that's happening and derails the practice. Yeah. So I think, anything you wanted to add, Julia?
Yeah, so what we do in our training is we really concentrate on the relaxation part of it, because it's something that is very easy to practice. Because if you're teaching a yoga class, generally speaking, at some point in the class, people will lie down, and you can practice using invitational language around the relaxation. And also you can differentiate between lying down for a few moments and lying down for longer. It's nice to tell people about how long a Yoga Nidra is, and that's why it's really nice for them to be comfortable. One thing that my students absolutely love is being tucked in with a blanket. I can't tell you how, there was the thing I missed the most, or one of the things I missed the most about lockdown, is that I loved having a room full of people where people would, basically what happens, they pick their blankets, and then it's not very easy to put a blanket over yourself without like missing a toe or missing a foot. And I would always ask, would you like me to tuck you in? Would you like me to put the blanket over you? And often people would say yes. And then they might not say yes the first time they see that I ask, but when they see me tucking everybody else in and them all going, cozy, comfortable, then they tend to want to be tucked in as well. And that's another thing that can really help people feel comfortable about a Yoga Nidra. Often I'll introduce, like, do you remember when you were a child, it may have been the case that you had the opportunity to have a story read to you. And if you notice, I've used the words, when you were a child, you may have. Not everyone was read a bedtime story. That might seem to you as if it's the most common thing in the world. Surely every child was read a bedtime story. But some people won't have been read a bedtime story. And then if they weren't, they'll be like, it's okay. Julia has they won't be like turning around thinking this, but the language that I've used will have been allowed them to go, oh, that's not me. That's okay. But those people who have listened to a bedtime story when they were a kid, it's often one of people's favorite memories. It's like, oh, I'm just being laid down and having a little story. And that's something that we sometimes do in Yoga Nidra, almost like instead of the meat and bones, is invite people to lie down, use some of the tools and techniques of Yoga Nidra, and then maybe tell them a story. And then they can be in the story or not in the story. If you have people who don't have English as a first language, I'm in London, it is unbelievably common in my classes for me to have students who don't have English as their first language. It can be nice to invite people to listen to the cadence of your voice. And if the words sit, then great. But otherwise, just let them flow. That's useful for English speakers too. But it's nice to acknowledge the fact that somebody may not have English as their first language, and that when they're lying down in relaxation, it might be not so easy for them to have their brain engaged with the English language. And also to let people know they can do something complete, like when they lie down in Yoga Nidra, they can be doing something completely different. Like in their head, it doesn't matter what they're doing if they're enjoying it. If they're having a party doing something else, I've got one student, and every time we practice Yoga Nidra, she goes to her meditation space, and she quite likes having that time to do what she wants to do in her head. And I only know that because we sit in circle afterwards, and she tells us, oh, I went to my lovely place again. And I've got used to over the time knowing that that's what she does in Yoga Nidra. And also, there's nothing wrong with anybody's experience. So you might have an expectation in your Yoga Nidra that someone will experience something. It's really useful to let that go and not have any expectation of what people's experience is.
I do think it's so important to just give people a little idea of what's coming up. So, for example, you might have somebody who's really new to coming into doing this kind of relaxation, or hasn't listened to a meditation being guided before, and to sort of share that you might be so comfortable in the way that you're set up with props that you might fall asleep, or you might realize partway through that you've missed a whole lot of what I said. And that's okay. It's quite common. It's normal that you're sort of drifting in and out, going into this liminal space, and then you might come out and be aware of a few words, because otherwise that might be a little bit alarming to somebody. And they think, oh gosh, I've missed it, or they might suddenly sort of jerk awake. But if you've told them, it's fine if you fall asleep, what will happen is I will make my voice louder. If necessary, I'll use your name at the end of, to help you come around. You're just sort of preempting a little bit different experiences that people might have that might make them feel anxious if they've not experienced them before.
Yeah, I was thinking about falling asleep as well. So sometimes people fall asleep and sometimes they snore. And if you've normalized that, then what it means is and I've got experience of people coming and sometimes they fall asleep and snore, and sometimes they don't fall asleep and snore. But what is great is that they come back, and the other people in that group also come back. So the snoring has been normalized. Sometimes people do giggle if someone snores, and that's okay. You can normalize that too. It's all right for people to have the reactions that they have. If you've got teenagers, then you might have a lot, or young children, you might have a lot of giggling. And I think we have to remember that when we're in class, we are not we're not the disciplinarians of the group. We obviously, it has to be held, and everyone has to, what we're intending is for people to all be able to have a good experience. But within that, we are allowed to be lighthearted, and people are allowed to experience things how they experience them. And if we are open to that and acknowledge that and allow that to happen, then there won't be any shame, or the intention is for there not to be shame involved. And that's another reason to unpack things afterwards, so that if there is any giggling or snoring or whatever, then the people who've giggled or the people who've snored feel okay about that experience, and the people who didn't giggle or snore also feel okay about that experience. It's about normalizing whatever that experience has been.
I just wanted to make one more point before we move on to the last tip, which I think it's just so important to give choice in how the position that somebody chooses. And the reason I say that is because in the trauma work that I do, there are some positions that can be incredibly triggering. So I'm going to give you one example, so it just kind of makes it easier to understand. So one person that I had as a client, it actually happened both times in both labours, that she experienced a really difficult situation during the labour where she felt like she wasn't being listened to. And both times she was laid on her back with her knees bent, and somebody had draped cloth over her, which is, you can see the parallels to a position we might choose in a Yoga Nidra. So you might have things underneath your knees, propping your knees up so your back's comfortable, a blanket over you. And fortunately, we sort of discussed positioning and how different positions felt, because she sort of unpacked what had happened. And even though she was aware that that position was tricky, And we'd been building towards her feeling okay in that position, because she wanted to go back to doing yoga and not find it triggering. So we were very gently sort of building up to her being okay. But we had to do it very carefully, you know, step by step, keeping her eyes open. Was that okay being in that position? Are you ready now to kind of have something over you? And it's just thinking about very commonplace positions, lying flat on your back or having your knees bent in semi-supine. For some people, this will be triggering of an experience they've had. So we don't need to know all the ins and outs when we're just working one-to-one if it's not a trauma situation or we're working in a group situation, but just to give options, allow somebody to go, I don't feel comfortable with that. They might not even be able to name the reason why, but they've got an opportunity to choose something else.
Yeah, I was thinking as you said that about the use of bolsters, because I think there may have been someone who in the group who said they teach restorative yoga. It's a very lovely combination, regardless, restorative yoga and Yoga Nidra. And in restorative yoga, we use props. And there's a prop that I love, which is a weighted belly. So having a weighted bolster on the belly. I know that there are people who find that claustrophobic, horrible, like a really just like not nice thing at all. But that doesn't mean that I can't introduce it as an option for people, because for me, it's a really lovely, grounding, gorgeous feeling. And so what I might do is introduce that earlier on in the class as a thing. People experience it. They go, oh my God, that's horrible. And also I can show them how they could have it and remove it as well. So there's no reason why you can't introduce that. Like, let's say you're doing a workshop and it's restorative yoga with Yoga Nidra. That's quite a common workshop to do. And so you can introduce it, and then some people might really benefit from it. And it's almost like you're doing it as, we're going to try this. We're all going to have a go together, but don't do it if you don't want to. And then we're going to sit in circle afterwards and talk about whether it was nice or not nice. And then that's a really lovely way for you to introduce different practices to your client base. So there's on one side what Tessa was talking about, which is somebody who is very likely to be triggered by a particular position, and maybe they want to be able to lie in that position, and modeling alternatives. I think it makes such a difference when you model, you actually physically model what it looks like to lie in that different position. And again, if you share restorative yoga, it's very likely that you'll have been doing forward lying positions. So people might be able to go back to that forward lying position that they knew they found comfortable instead of. Yeah, Tessa.
Yeah, just to reinforce what Julia's saying, because it just takes the permission to another level. If you show one and then you say verbally, oh, but you could do this or this, it somehow gives this idea that the one you modeled is the preferable one, is the better one, is the right one. Whereas if you model, say, 3 different ones, then they feel like they're more equal options. So it's just something maybe to play with. Yeah. Should we move on to
so
tip
we're now going to, so tip 1 has been your role as a Yoga Nidra facilitator. Tip 2 has been comfort and posture. Please feel free as we go along to ask any questions about those two. But now this was inspired actually by Morven, who teaches Yoga for Cancer. She's an absolutely beautiful Yoga for Cancer teacher. And she did a post, which I think was a really useful one, because however we share Sankalpa, it is really worthwhile thinking about what that is and how they work. And she gave a particular suggestion based on her experience, which as a teaching yoga for cancer person, which works for her and works for her clients. And we thought that it was really worthwhile revisiting the subject of Sankalpa. And it was kind of inspired by her. So thank you, Morven, for doing that post. It really made us think hard about Sankalpa. Over to you, Tessa.
Yeah, so I mean, Sankalpa is traditionally incorporated into Yoga Nidra as an intention. Sometimes it's described as a long-term intention. It might be for a spiritual practice. You're choosing one, maybe even have help from your teacher to choose one, and then you're using that every single practice. But I think probably for a lot of people that are coming into our classes, or we're working one-to-one, it's a lighter intention that we might be working with. So again, you come back to this idea of choice. So you might make some suggestions of what an intention might be, but it's always good to say or something else. So it might be just very simple ones. If your intention is that you're giving them 15 minutes of a relaxing yoga nidra, you might suggest, I am calm, I am resting, I am present, something quite neutral. And then they can always choose their own. I was thinking, I teach pregnancy yoga, and I was thinking, you know, I think a lot because of hypnobirthing and things like that, a lot of the affirmations we have are very targeted on a particular outcome. So something like you might have, my birthing journey is easy and smooth. But from a trauma-informed approach, that could be difficult. Then people might choose that they're comfortable, they want to really focus on that. But you could see the potential that if somebody went through the labour and it was nothing like easy and smooth, that for some people, they might then take that as a personal failure, that they tried, you know, they did all the practices and they had these affirmations and yet it didn't work. So I think we have to be very careful as a facilitator when we're suggesting things as a sankalpa. And if we've got more time, so if we've got a workshop or a day retreat or a longer retreat, what is really beautiful is to have time where you have maybe a journaling exercise. So somebody has properly the time to think about what they might want to use as an intention, if you're going to go for a sort of deeper level intention. Because often what I find when I'm listening to something, it's like, oh, you know, choose your intention, and they're on to the next thing. I'm like, whoa, I haven't had any time at all to think about what words I might choose that are actually meaningful for me. So I think it comes back to what's your intention as a facilitator for the yoga nidra you're about to deliver. If it's very simple, short one, suggest something really simple like I am calm, I am resting, or something that you prefer. If you're trying to get somebody, you know, maybe you've got a themed workshop, you need to give people time to really unpack for themselves what would be helpful for it to be meaningful, I think.
Yeah.
Having said that, you don't actually need to have an intention or a sankalpa. It is an optional part of a yoga nidra. Julia, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. In some traditions, they say with sankalpa, it's like say it to yourself in your head as if it's already happening or it's already come true. And I think that can be something that we really need to think about when we're sharing sankalpa, because we can't make, like, it's like you can't, you don't want it to be like a promise. Like, if you do this, you will manifest. But what you could do is, it's like imagining something as if it's already happening, and then talking it, like if you've got a theme around it, then it can work. So I often use that kind of thing in a yoga nidra at the beginning of a month or at a full moon, because people might have had the opportunity to think about something that they are manifesting. I've got a lot of creatives in my classes, and it can be really helpful if they're writing the next chapter of their book to imagine what it might be like to be at the next stage of it. So you can use a sankalpa as part of a creative process, but again, it's about having the permissive language so that people don't have to do that at all. They can opt out of it, and that it's not a promise. It's an imagining what if or thing. It's like at the end of a class, a lovely thing that you can do with kids is you can imagine a wish, and everyone makes a wish and you blow it into the world. But we're not promising that something's going to come true. We're just giving something, we're just creating something that's light. But I find yoga nidra very useful for planning. So it could be a lovely thing to use a sankalpa as a planning tool. I would say if you're going to use Sankalpa as a planning tool, maybe that's something that you might want to do our training. I mean, like, it's taken me a while to use it as a planning tool. And it's because I'm very used to looking at the cycles of the moon, doing meditations around intentions. And it's something that I really love to do. And I love to then sit in circle with my group and go, right, does anyone want to share? And then people often share like the painting that they're finishing or whatever it is. But it's kind of when that's introduced, you've created a container for what that will look like. If you suddenly throw in a Sankalpa about creativity and people aren't in the space to be part of that, it could land strangely. So by all means have themes.
Yeah.
So yeah, by all means have themes, but it's about the preparation for the theme. Yeah, Tessa.
Yeah, I was just going to say it might sort of set off a feeling of anxiety for somebody if you're, you know, talking about a really big intention or talking about an intention around creativity and they feel like they're the furthest away from a creative person. So I think it's about the preparation so that somebody feels ready. If you're going to include Sankalpa, they feel ready to have those words you know, to repeat maybe 2 or 3 times before they go into the rest of the practice. And then it's really nice to revisit it at the end rather than it's sort of just tokenistically put in there, because that's something you do in Yoga Nidra. Again, it comes back to our intention. Why are we using it? So if you've planted it and then maybe at the end and you come back and you can say, remember that heartfelt intention. So you're carrying it through into the rest of the day or into the rest of the practice. And sometimes it's really beautiful to, you might go around the circle if you're in a group and just say, for those that would like to share their intention, there's a real power to voicing it compared to just keeping it inside. It gives it a power if you share it. And it doesn't have to, you know, another way just to help people ground afterwards is to ask for people one word for how they're feeling at the end of the Yoga Nidra. So for example, my Well Women class is on a Thursday evening and it's quite late, it's after pregnancy yoga, so people might have fallen asleep and I want to make sure that they're ready to drive home. So speaking out loud in front of the group is another way of grounding. So they might just go around, they might say tired, relaxed, calm, but just having that opportunity to share something of how they're feeling. That checking in is a really trauma-informed way. And it might just help you sort of get a sense of whether your intention for the Yoga Nidra actually landed for them.
Yeah. So today, we haven't looked at every single aspect of a trauma-informed Yoga Nidra. We've only got an hour. So we've done the best we can with the time that we've had. And what we chose to do today was to give you the opportunity to hear 3 really clear tips on how to help your Yoga Nidra be trauma-informed. And the first was looking at your role as the Yoga Nidra facilitator. The second was to look at comfort and posture. And the third was to look at Sankalpa. If you have any questions about any of these 3 or other aspects of how to create a trauma-informed Yoga Nidra, do feel free to ask any questions or to contact us. We seem to make ourselves very available to be contacted. You can find us at circleholding.org or yogateachersforum.org and info@circleholding.org, info@yogateachersforum.org. That comes directly to us. You can say, I've got a question for Tessa, I've got a question for Julia, or I've got a question for either of you. That works well. And we have the Yoga Nidra and Circle Holding training that begins on the 9th of September. You might need to rearrange your diary so that you're around on a Monday between 12:30. No, it's 1:30, I think. 1:30 and 3:30. 1:30 and 3:30. We're doing a little bit later than we have previously. So it's between 1:30 and 3:30 BST on a Monday from September. And in that course, there's a trauma-informed thread running through the entirety of that training. Even if you've done Yoga Nidra training before, we've got people who've been very experienced Yoga Nidra practitioners and people brand new to it. We've had people from all sorts of different backgrounds coming and join us. The more diverse the group is, the richer it is, and we've had beautiful diversity in the groups that we've run. So if you'd like to find out more about that, then do let us know. Yes, Tessa.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think one of our main aims is to really help people feel confident to create their own nidras, because first of all, if somebody's reading a script, you can really tell the difference. You can hear it's being read. And I think it's just much more likely that if you've got words in front of you, it's harder to stay attuned to those. You might keep looking up, but there's sort of a pull of the words on the page. And what I'd really recommend is, perhaps you found a script that you love, but if you kind of read through it a few times and make a few bullet points of the key things you want to cover, that frees you up in terms of finding the right words in that moment, and really kind of looking away from the page and keep checking in what's happening around for the people in front of you. So our aim is that you feel confident that you can be attuned and respond in real time. You might have an idea of what you want to do, but you can do that responding so that you're really looking after the people that are there.
Yeah, and when we talk about yoga, we talk about it in terms of practice. I would say Yoga Nidra is also a practice. The more we practice something, the more comfortable we become doing it. And that's why there's practice all the way through. The training is not a top-down, we don't have a top-down approach at all. It's learning by doing, because by the end of the training, you want to be doing. So if all you're doing is listening before, then you're not going to flex that muscle of doing. And it's our intention for you to be able to flex that muscle of doing so that your confidence increases with time. And if you have a specific thing that you want to be able to do by the end, you've got the opportunity at the beginning to say that, so that we can tailor the training towards your particular individual needs, just like we do with Yoga Nidra itself. We try and tailor it to the requirements of the people who've joined us. So we're coming up to the end of the session today. Thank you so much to everybody who's joined us live. We're going to, and thank you if you're watching the recording too. We're going to stop the recording now. Do stay around if you've got any questions. Tessa, just before
there was a
we
comment
turn off.
about staying in touch, and we would love it if you go onto our circleholding.org website. You can sign up to the newsletter, because we've got lots of exciting things coming up. The book about circle holding is being published in October, and you'll be invited to an online launch that we'd love you to be part of. There's a podcast series coming on the 1st of September where we've interviewed really diverse circle holders, and it's just, I think that holding space that you do as circle holder is so pertinent to when you're facilitating Yoga Nidra. So even if you don't think of yourself as a circle facilitator, it will still be relevant. So do please stay in touch.
Definitely. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording now.